So for this episode, I will be speaking for myself. I mean, obviously, I work for Voices for Vaccines, but would like to keep my comments to myself as I try to do with my personal media.
Hey, everybody. I am here with Noah from Voices for Vaccines. What's up, Noah?
Things are going good. How are you?
Good. I wanted to have you on because I noticed that you're like a younger person doing vaccine advocacy, and most of the people in my sort of space doing this work are in my age cohort in their 40s. And I just noticed, like, first of all, I don't think I see a lot of young anti-vaxxers, but I also don't see like a lot of young people advocating for vaccines. How did you get involved in Voices for Vaccines?
Yeah, so I've always been interested in public health. That's kind of a focus of mine academically. So it's been something I've been working on for a few years, but I didn't work on it professionally until last year. And so I joined or was interning for a company called the Task Force for Global Health. And they're kind of this big global health conglomerate, I guess, in the United States. And they're trying to do more domestic work. And so they're pairing with an organization called Voices for Vaccines. So when I was working there, I got to know kind of a lot of people in the vaccine space, a lot of people doing advocacy here. And so I just kind of gradually connected from one to another. So it was a college internship, basically.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. I don't think a lot of people get to do that for a college internship. You're a comms person for Voices for Vaccines. What is that? What do you do like on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so it's a lot of writing for the most part, a lot of social media stuff. A lot of the battle for COVID and COVID vaccines and information, things like that, is on social media. And so we've done a lot of, anything we can really do to try and, I guess, kind of occupy the space and get people good information. Whether that's writing, articles that answer direct questions that we're seeing on social media or in other spaces, doing interviews with scientists, doing research and kind of writing pieces. It's a lot of just trying to see what everyone's talking about and just be a very active part of the conversation and a resource.
Yeah, you're right. The battle for the COVID vaccine did play out online, or is still playing out online, and it's a really, really kind of a messy space. I occupy a very different part of that space than you do. What we do is we kind of find sort of influential people in anti-vaxxism, I guess, who other people might not know so much about, and try to highlight them. And to some extent, if I can, I'll try to antagonize them and get them mad enough to try to talk to me on the air.
Right.
I'm, pretty low number of people end up doing that, because if you do a little bit of checking, you'll be like, oh, that's not a good place for me to go.
Have you had any success getting any like major anti-vaxxers on here? Or
defining major is really hard, because there's people who are like way up front, like who are out in front, like, RFK Jr., Brett Weinstein, I don't know, those great Barrington Declaration people. But then there's people who are kind of behind the scenes and making trouble in that way. Like, I'm not sure if you're aware of your group is called Voices for Vaccines. There's a group out of Northern California called V is for Vaccine. We've definitely had our run-ins with the guy who runs that. His name is Joshua Coleman. He's definitely really active behind the scenes. I don't know if you've seen those black, white, and red signs at like every vaccine event.
I haven't run into them, fortunately.
Let me see if I can pull one up for you here.
For sure. That is funny, though. I do spar with a lot of people in this space as well. So just wondering if we have some of the same, I don't want to say enemies, but people we're interacting with.
Oh, I'm happy to call them my enemies. I mean, you are definitely, maybe you and I are just differently situated and kind of have different dispositions towards all this. So here's the signs I was talking about.
Okay, yeah, I know exactly what you're referencing.
I'll bring this up on the feed so people that are watching can see. Yeah, it's these. It's just for people watching. It's these black, white, and red signs, and the guy in the middle of this image is Joshua Coleman. He's definitely one of the people we've had run-ins with, and he's doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes. He gets these signs printed. there's some people who we know through other work we're doing who believe that these are actually being printed by a print shop owned by a fairly well-to-do Scientologist, which is a little bit interesting.
Wow.
Have you run across any, maybe not necessarily Scientology, but have you run across any cults or cult-like groups in your work?
I'm trying to think. I mean, I know a lot of people who do the more traditional, like fighting with, the really big anti-vaxxers that are just like kind of way off the deep end, like Mary Bowden, you might know. I think her name is MD Breed on Twitter. Like people who are really kind of far gone there. And so, they argue with them, my colleagues, people I work with. I interestingly tend to argue with people, unfortunately, people who are more towards the middle, who are not anti-vaccine completely, but very strongly, I don't know. They downplay vaccines to a certain extent. And so that's who I tend to argue with. I do argue with the anti-vaxxers, but no cults, fortunately.
Well, the other thing is like a group like, any well-organized cult, if they're involved in this, you're going to be trying to hide the fact that their organization is involved in this because it does bring a bit of a stigma, even for a control group.
Yeah.
You had brought somebody up a moment ago whose name I didn't recognize. And I couldn't repeat the name. Who was that?
Yeah, Mary Bowden. So I don't know a ton about her, but she is anti-vaxxer who just is really, really combative. And so she kind of goes and actively fights pediatricians or vaccine advocates or whomever. Kind of like, I don't know, like libs of TikTok, how they find like random people and try and expose them. She does that for vaccine people. And so I run into her quite a bit just, because of that behavior.
Oh, I'll try to remember that name. I like a good rattle. Were you there at the founding of Voices for Vaccines, or did you get involved later on after it had already been founded?
Well, after. So Voices for Vaccines actually goes back to about 2013. And so I just graduated college actually a few months ago. So was not there for it, but it's about 8 or 9 years old at this point.
Oh, very good. What's really weird about sort of operating in this space, right? If I heard the name Voices for Vaccines, I would have to go take a look at the website and go take a look at what they're putting on social media, because the anti-vaccine groups will tend to try to use names that are a bit confusing or that look like legitimate, like public health advocacy organizations.
No, absolutely. Like Children's Health Defense is the classic one out of it's RFK Jr.'s project, which is, totally perverting, actual protection and freedom is another thing you commonly see in their names and stuff like that. It's a really tricky game.
Yeah. There's others like the one I mentioned before, V is for Vaccine. That's a little more obvious, maybe that might be an anti-vaccine group, but you're right. Like Children's Health Defense, that sounds like it could be anything, right? It could be,
Right.
could be a group where they try to get kids health care who don't have health insurance. And it becomes a big mess when you're looking into this stuff, because for maybe the anti-conspiracism researcher or whatever, we end up having to know who all these people are, who all these groups are, what are they saying, why are they saying it, and then you end up in this position where even if you're pretty sure you know what some group is, you're like, well, let me look that up. Is that the right thing? And it's just real tough because there's all these disparate little groups, and it just becomes like almost overwhelming for the average person to figure out like who you can trust. Just because someone has a slick website with pictures of kids on it doesn't mean that it's like the United Way or something.
Right. And that's become a pretty common tactic, actually, as you'll see. And this is among people who are pro-vaccine and anti-vaccine, but just there's a lot more, not grassroots, because that implies maybe like a political local thing, but, individual or small scale efforts are popping up all around, or people are starting these projects between doctors, whatever. And so you see these very sleek websites pop up very quickly. It's not hard to make a sleek website nowadays. And so you see all sorts of new projects popping up constantly. It does get really easy to lose track. The other thing about that, I don't know if you've heard of an organization called the Brownstone Institute. Does that ring any bells?
No, but it sounds like it's either like a think tank that some people might find reputable, but is actually just reaching for my wallet, or like a group of cranks. That's the two things that I think it could be. But watch, it's like just it's like a totally nice group of doctors. Now that I said that, right?
No. You're in the right direction. The difficulty is that actually those things tend to blend nowadays, right? Because it's common for doctors with followings to come together and start like a think tank or a project or a collective or whatever. And so this started as kind of like an not vaccine, but like public health, like masks and distancing and all things like that. And then they started to gradually incorporate people. And so you have these kind of big projects, these things that are, there's people you clearly can't call anti-vaccine because they talk about vaccination and try and get people to be a part of it, but then they associate with overt anti-vaxxers. And so things really, really have gotten messy, especially 2 years into the pandemic when nobody's even really on the site keeping track. So yeah, it's difficult.
It is. And the other thing, a lot of times these groups of cranks will try to use almost grandiose language to describe what they're doing. Like I saw on your blog that you've been writing about the Great Barrington Declaration. The Great Barrington Declaration sounds like the treaty that ended World War III.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. No, actually, there's a lot there. I don't know if you know the history of that, but I know one of the authors personally of that of the Declaration because I'm a Stanford alum, and one of the authors is Jay Bhattacharya.
Yeah. We do a Bay Area news show because I'm from the Bay. Also, because of where you went to school. If we were the same age, I would have to be your mortal enemy. But it's been long enough since I was in school that doesn't matter. We saw him a lot, like kind of doing local news hits here, and it was actually fairly disappointing. We were pretty disappointed in our local news organizations because they were kind of presenting that guy as, oh, well, here's, a dissenting voice on this, and they were kind of presenting him as if he represented like a big portion of medicine and a big portion of academic medicine. And it just didn't seem to be the case at all. It seemed like he was kind of out on his own in a lot of ways. And I was just I was just super disappointed in the way our, the big three local news stations, to the extent that I was able to see all three, that they covered him. It was fairly disappointing. And they didn't have someone else on like after him, or they didn't even mention that like the things that he's saying are disputed by, the consensus in his field or anything. And it was
yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I mean, we don't have to be mortal enemies because I disagree severely with him. I mean, I do know him, and I don't. It's a working relationship for sure, and I don't think he's a bad person. But his ideas clearly are not the mainstream. I mean, you have. There's no doubt about that, and I know. And I kind of wonder why they would platform somebody like that very actively, versus anybody else, because I worked for the Stanford Alumni Association then, and we were covering medical stuff out of Stanford because COVID was kind of the big thing. And so there were so many people we drew on. I mean, I was reading the medical research out of there every single day on vaccines, on, what's the infection fatality rate. I mean, all sorts of things like that. And I didn't learn who Jay Bhattacharya was until I got on Twitter. I mean, at the end, maybe, 9 months into last year. I mean, I really had no clue. And so it's interesting to me that people have that perspective because I just didn't even know that was happening. And I was in the Bay Area, same time as you. So that is a weird thing that did happen. Yeah.
Well, I don't think I would have caught it either if one of the people I work on this project with wasn't so interested in local news and hadn't started a local news show on this project a while ago. Because I don't watch the local news channels. I mean, I don't even have cable. Like, I think, my generation is sort of the cutoff for people who still have cable. Some of us do and some of us don't. But like, like a lot of people who are kind of in the thick of things, in the fight or whatever, are going to tend to be people who don't watch a lot of like television news, right? Because we're terminally online. And yeah, like I said, it was just like really disappointing to see him on local news kind of touted as some kind of like expert, and that he was just like had some different view, and that it wasn't presented as his view is contrary to what your public health officials are telling you. And I think I think it was bad for the local news to do it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing that I'm learning, and I only really learned this when I looked into that issue very deeply. If you've read that essay, it's like 9,000 words. I mean, that was a long argument I had with him, and it's the difficult thing about this pandemic is that if I think of myself as relatively scientifically literate. I studied that for months and wrote about it for months. I mean, the average person is never going to be able to come close to the level of literacy, able to really, really accurately evaluate whether the things he's saying are true. And that's been true of a lot of things this pandemic. Vaccines, it's a little easier for the things he was saying, masks and lockdowns and COVID and things like that. It's difficult. And so that's been one of the things that, I think it makes it really hard, not even just for those who are looking to actively be contrarian, but other news sources as well to even say like, hey, this is what I'm hearing on Fox News, or this is what I'm hearing on this news network. I mean, it's hard for anybody besides experts to really seriously evaluate it. Yeah.
Well, what I noticed was like a phenomenon I'd seen before came out in full force during this pandemic. It was the, oh no, I've done my research came out. And now,
Yeah.
and like when I've talked to people like that, the first thing I do is I just ask them like, what does that mean? Like, when you tell me you've done your research, what do you mean? And sometimes people will just tell me they're reading all these scientific papers, and I'm just sitting there going, I'm a pretty smart guy, and I haven't told myself that I'm qualified to go through, all these scientific papers and basically be the peer review process by myself. And it's, I think a lot of people who will tell you they read scientific papers are probably like fibbing a little bit, right? Because they're getting someone else's interpretation of it. But there's this phenomena, and some people are just, they've convinced themselves that they can reason their way through something highly technical, almost to the exclusion of empiricism and expertise. And it came out in a big way in the pandemic, and I think it hurt a lot of people. And I've been talking about it for a long time, and a lot of people told me that I was, you shouldn't be talking about these things. Why aren't you talking about real news? And then all of a sudden the pandemic hit, and everybody was like, oh, you should go on his show. He knows what he's talking about. And it's like, well, thanks, I guess.
Right. And the thing I've also, there's somebody who was a journalist during COVID, kind of taught me this. Her name is Tara Haley. And she put out this big thing a few months back about how, the main skill of a communicator, and this, I guess, a little bit applies to me, is to be able to know what you don't know, right? More than anything else. And the unfortunate thing is that most of our media is not based around that. I've been writing on COVID for, about 9 months at this point, just kind of on my own or for, Voices for Vaccines. And I feel like now, I've only gotten more careful with time. It just is so difficult to understand each individual aspect of this, whether it's vaccines, that could take you 4 months, whether it's masks, that could take you 3 to 4 months to really, really know, especially with all the changes over time, what works and what doesn't. There just is, months and months and months of research that has to go into each individual thing. And when you can comment on it, you can. But really, I think this has taught me personally and professionally just to have so much more modesty than I did before.
Yeah, and one of the things I try to like instill in the people who watch my crazy streams is that they're not, you're not going to know everything. You're not going to be able to figure out the answer to everything. I'm not going to be able to figure out the answer to everything. The experts don't have the answer to everything. And It's super important for the average person, I think, if they're interested in consuming news of any kind, really, is to be able to spot patterns of deception, be able to spot patterns of people trying to take you for a ride, trying to get you to believe something versus trying to give you information. I think those are two incredibly different things. And I think that, when you're able to kind of spot patterns, like one of the big things I noticed during COVID was when people were contrarian, the first thing they would do is they'd come at you and trot out some sort of weird esoteric achievement they had made, or they would be like, I am the leading scientist in such and such a thing. And you're like, no, you're not. Like the leading scientist in that probably has no idea that they're doing the best work.
Doesn't use Twitter.
Right.
Yeah. Or yeah.
Right. They just have no idea that they're right now probably the best in that field because they're busy.
Right.
And so when you see people like sort of puffing up their chest a little bit about their qualifications and their intelligence or whatever, telling you that they're the one making sense of everything and that other people are lying to you and whatnot, it's just, there's no way that you should trust that person, and you should go find someone else, someone a little more humble, someone hedging a little bit more, someone deferring to other experts when it's appropriate.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, the fortunate thing, and it's, you know, you kind of got to do this on your own. But we now have a clear record for everybody. I mean, that's, you know, I'm mainly on Twitter. It is very common to see somebody bring up something somebody said, you know, a year and 9 months ago, or, you know, even before the pandemic. I mean, there is such a clear record that people are keeping track of what others are doing. And so that can be helpful. I mean, noticing that people make wrong predictions is fine. You know, consistent wrong predictions and not, you know, being corrected, I think is a good sign for most people that this is not a scientist I should follow. So if there's somebody, again, it seems generic or seems a little bit bland to say, look for humility in communications. But that is absolutely the number one thing. The other thing that really, really helps is to find comparisons between people who are really off the deep end and people who are a little bit off the deep end. You know, there's somebody who we argue with pretty commonly, or I argue with pretty commonly, Marty McCary, you may have heard of. In fact, I think that's how you saw me on social media. I was arguing with him. He is not an anti-vaxxer. I mean, this guy is pro-vaccine as far as I know for, you know, every vaccine, but he's consistently argued at every emergency use, we need more data, we need more safety or whatever, right? And so he's discouraged vaccination. And one of the things to say, like, hey, you know, we know vaccines work, we know they're safe, you know, you keep throwing doubt, and look for similar tactics between those who it's their career to throw doubt, and then somebody who just is doing it, you know, temporarily. Commonly, it'll be like an anti-vaxxer and somebody who's like verging in that direction. So that can also be useful just to see if there's similarities there.
Yeah, that, you know, knowing about the anti-vaccine movement coming into this got me prepared for dealing with Brett Weinstein and his followers. You have to be aware of this guy.
I do know him. I don't follow him too closely, fortunately. I mean, he seems you know, to be pretty right-wing and pretty inflammatory, but I just haven't seen him too much.
So we had first found him because we do a show about the intellectual dark web. The show's called The Intellectual Dollar Tree. Not to toot my own horn, it's actually a pretty popular podcast. And so I kind of knew who he was coming in, and a lot of people didn't. And they're like, oh, you know, he seems like he's, you know, a biologist, and, you know, he just has these concerns. And I'm like, well, he's an evolutionary biologist who was like a professor, and he doesn't have a lot of work in the field. And being a professor without a lot of published papers, it's fine. You know, we need people to be professors. It's a fine thing to be. But then he had some drama. He quit his job. He got a settlement from Evergreen, and now he's like a talk show host. And I was just trying to tell people, I'm like, no, he's just a talk show host, and he lies for a living. He's been lying about, you know, trans people for a while now, and he's going to switch over to the masks and the vaccines. But the thing is, I was able to kind of spot what he was doing as he went anti-vaccine in real time because of what you were saying a minute ago, being able to spot things that the craziest anti-vaxxer is doing, and then being able to compare them to people that seem reasonable. And if the people that seem, that's what you just said is great. If the people that seem reasonable are doing some of the same things the crazies are doing, you might want to slow down for a second and take a look at this person that you think seems reasonable.
Big red flag. And not only that too, but it sometimes is very, very glaring, just because people are so interconnected now. I mean, there's articles in national news outlets that link to Twitters, you know, or like, you know, posts on social media or whatever. You can often see people take anti-vax lines that, you know, they are supposedly pro-vaccine, they say they're pro-vaccine, and then they use literally an anti-vax line. The example from the other day was, what was it? There's COVID vaccines for kids under 5. Now, you know, there's an EUA for it. And there's this anti-vaxxer who was saying, you know, a baby can't tell you if they have myocarditis was the line, right? Because this is a side effect for the, you know, 12 to 17-year-olds. And it's supposed to scare parents to say like, hey, you know, like this is going to be terrible for them. And then 2 weeks later in national news, this was Fox News, Marty, who is the person I'm arguing with, used that line directly. And it was a consistent fear-mongering line in the anti-vaccine community. I mean, I heard this every single day. There was some new viral post, and then he picks it up and puts it on Fox News. And it makes you think, I mean, it's not true. I mean, you know, babies when they have myocarditis actually turn pale. It's a very clear condition a lot of the time. But I'm not a doctor, so obviously, you know, not medical advice. But it's a misconstrual, but he literally just picked up that line and then used it. And it's clear where, I can't say it's clear where he got it from 100%, but like that's a little bit suspicious. And so if you can find things like that, that really is a red flag too.
And I mean, to be fair, I couldn't tell you maybe if I have myocarditis right now too, because I have some of the risk factors for it. I unfortunately picked up smoking during a during a respiratory disease pandemic. Seems crazy,
Right.
but whatever. We're all different. I drink. I have risk factors for things like that, and I couldn't tell you if I have it.
Most adults, right? Yeah, I mean, it's a complex condition. Like,
right, when you have something that's like that, we can't just like intuitively diagnose ourselves anyway. So the idea that the baby can't tell you that they have myocarditis, I just can't even believe that somebody takes that seriously as a thing, because I probably have medical conditions that I don't know about. I'm 45 years old, I'm not a big old health freak. So like we can't intuitively diagnose ourselves. And I think maybe you bring up another thing where a lot of people sort of have been convinced that maybe they can
diagnose kind of medical conditions, you mean? Yeah, I mean, it's we'll say a little bit. What do you mean about that? I mean, I have ideas about that, but
I just think that it's one of these things that you might, and sometimes these are going to be even in like more like lefty sort of like kind of health people spaces where it's like, your body, listen to your body, and those are actually good advice, right? If you're feeling pain or whatever, go to the doctor. But the absurd extension of that, and it certainly exists probably in a yoga studio within 10 miles of where I am right now. The absurd extension to that is that, we know well enough to diagnose ourselves. And I just think that though the baby doesn't know they have myocarditis, is just an extension of that kind of stupid reasoning where people do believe that they've been able to diagnose themselves. And a lot of them, it's because they've done their research.
Yeah, that's an interesting problem. And I would wonder, for me specifically, if it holds outside of the United States. And the reason I think it's popular here is that we are very, very big on self-help, and we're very, very big on psychology and kind of, trying to understand our own psychology. And so with this self-help movement that has, been around and goes into the wellness, holistic health, a lot of quackery there, of course, that has made us really prone to think we are kind of experts of our own selves. And one thing I'll take away from this pandemic, is that you really got to try and follow, scientific medicine for your own lifestyle too. It's really, really difficult to diagnose a medical condition. Before the booster for the mRNA vaccines, I mean, even I, was like, hey, I have a health condition as well, heart, related to my heart. And I was like, hey, well, I heard that it has myocarditis and maybe it'll inflame my heart. And you just get these really strange concerns that make no sense medically. But it's super, super common for people to do. And I would wonder if that's a United States thing or something everywhere, but totally get that concern. Yeah.
You brought up the self-help and us being big on psychology. I would have added maybe the modifier pop psychology to psychology there. But I mean, it's natural though. Like in your case, it's, if you have some sort of underlying medical condition that you know about, it's natural to be concerned before you have any medical procedure. But again, like you said, that's why you ask somebody who knows, because you don't just intuitively know. It's been real rough, and it was just kind of good to see. You were like the first young person I kind of saw like going out there and trying to talk to people about this stuff. You can't possibly be the only one. You're just the one that I noticed, the one that, we follow a lot of the same people. And it was definitely good to see, because the rest of us are going to die off eventually. And we're going to need other people to kind of take over, either taking the piss out of conspiracy theorists, or to the extent that we can, helping people who are sort of on their way down the wrong path to try to like think twice and think a little bit more deeply about why reasons we might believe the things that we believe.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And that's actually, I'm not the only young person. I can say that because I work with a group at Stanford called Scientists Speak Up. And so this is a group run by PhD in environmental science, I believe. Her name is Mallory Harris. And we, work on a lot of different things. there's a whole group of us that basically try to counter misinformation and work together to try and think about what are effective ways to do so. And one of my thoughts that I'm seeing, I mean, a lot of the drama in the pandemic actually came out of Stanford is a big hive of it now. UCSF is another school that has just had a lot of drama. Our thought is that, if students are actually involved in this kind of stuff and they're pushing back against, it's often doctors, it's often people with these fancy titles associated with university professors, et cetera. If we're on campus saying like, hey, we don't want this paper at our school, or we want it regulated, or we want to, some sort of solution from the university, then that can be a good safeguard against it. So you're absolutely correct. I mean, there's not a lot of young people who know the names of any anti-vaxxers or, what Great Barrington is or anything like that. But I do think it's a key step to get more of us involved. Absolutely. It's something we're working on, but it's difficult.
Yeah. And I just, I think the flip side of that though, is I don't see a lot of people maybe even under 30 on the internet spreading a lot of anti-vaccine stuff. I think it's largely like my age cohort, Generation X. That's where all the kind of big names are. They're, like 42 to 50, 57 or whatever the range is now. That seems to be where everyone is.
Yeah, I would think that the age skew might be a little bit different off the internet in real life. I think young people on the internet are going to likely be very left leaning a lot of the time, or are more in that direction, and that has not been at least in this pandemic, really people who tend to be anti-vax or spread disinformation around COVID and things like that. So it might be a little bit different in real life. But I do think, young people just don't, especially for like masks and other public health measures. I mean, they were highly compliant. People who are at lowest risk were still totally willing to do it, often just as much as anybody else. And so I do agree. There's a hopeful willingness to kind of comply with public health.
I think there might also just be like maybe the most people fighting too are actually in my generation, because we were the first to really get the internet was when we were teenagers.
Yeah.
Younger people, they know not to believe the crap they read on the internet.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like there weren't a lot of 20-year-olds that ended up in sucked down the QAnon rabbit hole whose family couldn't talk to them anymore. And it's just because when you grow up with something, when you're like a sort of a citizen of the internet from birth or whatever, I think that you're just going to kind of almost naturally have sort of know the lay of the land and just be more, I'm not even sure skeptical is the word. You might, when you're on the internet, you might need to apply a healthy dose of cynicism to the things you're looking at.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's something actually that, not that young people are doing this, but has helped the misinformation side, is that they're unnaturally savvy. I mean, like, young people are usually pretty good at the internet, but they're not talking about vaccines, public health stuff. And so, the people who are doing anti-vaccine stuff are as savvy as young people in other areas, I've noticed. They have a lot of really smart tactics. It's like they're clearly like running analytics or something, trying to maximize how they get their word out. But that disproportionate savviness has really helped the anti-vaccine movement. I mean, no doubt about it. And not just them, but really anybody who tends to kind of be a little bit more contrary. More training is needed for pro-vaccine people for sure. Especially, like you said, like 30 plus, 40 plus. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing is, and I mean, not for nothing, like it's easy for a layperson to go out there and lie about vaccines, right? But it's very difficult for a layperson to go out there and debunk the lies about vaccines, because it's just so much more effort. You need so much more information to like debunk a lie than you need to just spread one that you heard somewhere else. What's the saying? Like the lie travels the world before the truth ties its shoes or whatever. Something like that.
I was thinking the exact same thing. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, 100%. And that's my traditional method of addressing things is, I'm just coming out of academia. And so I'm a long form writer, and, we'll do these, 50 tweet threads on how the vaccine is safe or whatever. And again, it's going to reach people. It's helpful, right? But it's like the person lying for each, individual thing, spent an hour on it and it just made it look scary or, spun some sort of really attractive rumor. So it's definitely an uphill disproportionate battle. And I don't know what the solution is, to be honest with you. I personally think some sort of structural solutions are needed. I don't know what your position on this is, but Twitter and other social media platforms are so awful at regulating anything that is just blatantly false. I mean, I'm a very pro free speech person, But things that are blatantly false, I'm just not sure that should be allowed. And they don't do anything about it at all. I mean, Robert Malone got banned on Christmas Eve 2021. So
right after
these things, no regulation.
It's like banning an army from your country after they've already torched the place, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And leaving everybody. I mean, he's a rare ban. I mean, most of the other ones are still up. So it's just really ineffective.
Yeah, my take on that is that I think the platforms, they know what they're doing. I don't think that these are not people who don't know what they're doing. And I think that people, again, many of them in my age cohort who run these companies have made a cynical decision that it is worth it to them to make the money from the controversy, and they don't care if that means that a pandemic spreads at twice the rate that it might otherwise spread, because they're rich and they have the best medical care in the world, and they're going to be just fine. I mean, I could believe it's a cynical view, of course, but not unwarranted I mean, perhaps a large extent. I mean, there's most of these misinformation accounts have many more followers than actual doctors. I mean, like infectious disease people who are world renowned usually are dwarfed. Sometimes it's like half the following of these people, and clearly false things. I mean, they'll share papers, quote unquote, that are just riddled with just absolute bullshit that could be lie line by line, and do that. It's a mill all day. So I have very little faith. I'm kind of with you. I don't know. Possible the incentive is money. I mean, I would lean towards agreeing with you, but it's hard to say. Well, there's also this thing, and I get into arguments with people sometimes about this. There's also this, this is something I haven't really fully fleshed out, but there's also this inclination, because of who runs these companies, to be really eager to sort of regulate and moderate for decorum and tone versus payload. So if somebody goes out there and is just say they're saying false things about you that are like slanderous, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, I looked into that. That's not true. And you can go fuck yourself. Well, the person who's spreading this false and slanderous stuff about you online, your recourse isn't going to be Twitter. If it's bad enough, your recourse would have to be the courts. And then Twitter is going to put me in the penalty box for telling that person to go fuck themselves. And it's like, well, somebody's using, in this case, somebody's using your site to defame someone who did nothing to them ever. And I'm just responding rudely, and you're going to regulate that. And you're not going to regulate, the payload of what somebody else is saying because they've said it politely.
Right. It's not for impact. I mean, no doubt about it. Yeah, and they get good at it too. They really know how to ban evade. I've realized too. I mean, some of the really wacky anti-vaxxers just don't care, and they haven't been banned. Some of them, you click on their links, and it's clearly like they're like, we don't know for sure. It's like reading, the fine print, but it's the whole text, or it's their whole Twitter page or whatever, right? Because they really really know that if they just say the exact right things, they will never get banned. And so it's very kind of methodical on their end. Yeah, I mean, I especially worry, with the future of this. I mean, I'm sure Elon Musk is thinking about buying Twitter, and he is, his whole bent is, pro free speech.
Unless you try to say anything bad about Elon.
Unless you criticize, right, yeah. But he, I think, is just what worries me is he's a poor steward of factuality, and this I think applies to a lot of people. There was a tweet he made maybe 2 months ago where he just said, never take Wellbutrin. Everyone I know who is on Wellbutrin or whatever, they have like a suicide story or something, which is just, making medical advice for tons and tons of people. Or he said, what was the other thing? Twitter has a clear left-wing bias, and there's research obviously against, whatever he said. It's the top level of our country, and we live in a capitalist country, so that these people who have that power are really sometimes more powerful than actual, legal bodies or regulatory bodies or anything like that. When he's willing to lie, and not just lie for his own gain, but callously. I mean, there's no gain in him just saying false things online.
The gain is, I grew up here, and I kind of came up during the time where we were delusional here in Silicon Valley about what we were going to do for and to the world. Right. And some people let go of that, and some people, Elon Musk, still think they're here to save the world.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
if he can say anything like, oh, the Wellbutrin's bad, and then he gets a bunch of, dudes, it's always dudes,
Yeah.
saying that he's right and all this, that's all he wants. He's like, what did, like, one of my favorite quotes is by a journalist named Kara Swisher. She says, "You're so poor, all you have is money." And sometimes you see some of these people and the way they behave, and they have
Yep.
everything in the world, and yet here they are showing their ass to people just to get attention. And it's like imagine like if I had that much money, I would pay people to tweet for me, right?
Right. That's got to be it. I think attention is better than anything else. I mean, my thought, I try, and this is maybe like a self-hurting optimism because I really want to believe that people give a shit, about being truthful. And it's like you could lie about something that's less consequential. You could be overt and draw attention without lying just so casually about a medication that literally will impact thousands or millions of people. He has 93 million people reading his tweets. But you're right. I mean, I think it's an attitude of being callous, a kind of attitude of disregarding the truth that then allows you to just be a very influential person or be a very provocative person, with everything you say.
And not for nothing, there are people out there that were seeing that, what he said about Wellbutrin. I wasn't aware of that tweet. Not for nothing. There's people out there who are struggling with their mental health, and they're seeing that, and like that. If they think Elon's like some kind of genius or whatever, and they're on it, that, like, come on, like you're just really gonna, like, you're gonna. There's not like a direct line to the harm you do there, but
Right.
somebody's gonna feel real crappy and maybe stop taking their meds or start, just like, oh no, like.
Yeah.
And the other, not for nothing, the kinds of people he knows who are on those kinds of drugs may very well be using them recreationally. I don't know. I don't know enough. I don't know enough about it, but it's just, yeah, it's just weird. And yeah, I think maybe letting rich people make all the decisions in our society was probably a bad idea.
Probably not the best. Yeah, I mean, one thing I will say again, I am very pro free speech person. So when I talk about like Twitter needs to regulate, strictly for saving lives. I mean, if it really can be demonstrated that this would help people, and I do believe in the case of some anti-vaxxers it would. But I think this idea of free speech needs to kind of be taken back to a certain extent to the very right leaning people and the people who run these or going to run these platforms. They're just not. There's an emphasis on free speech for speech's own sake, and so it's people just kind of putting out information constantly without very much value to it. I think people who really, really work hard to have high quality speech, I think that's a better framing of free speech in my mind, and that has traditionally been the people who are fighting this misinformation. So trying to reclaim that label to a certain extent or reclaim that brand, I think is really important.
So my take is that from the jump, when social media started, what we'll call bad actors, and I don't mean Nicolas Cage, I mean bad actors, are they've been playing the ref the whole time. Since the jump, they've been playing the ref, and they've done a very good job of it. And so instead of let's say MySpace still existed, right? Instead of Tom from MySpace saying, no, actually, this is my data center and I'll kick you off if I want. I don't want you spreading medical misinformation. I don't want you calling people the N-word on my website. I don't want you mistreating gay and trans people on my website. And you can go to a different website if you don't like it. Instead of doing that, these people were terrified because, probably in no small part, because they're from right here in the Bay Area where everybody thinks it's this huge leftist place with all these biases.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I think the bad actors have done a very good job of playing the refs. They've just, instead of playing the game, they just played the refs, trying to make sure they're just always up in the ear of the referee. And now the referee seems to be on their side because the referee is terrified of being accused of having some kind of liberal bias or whatever. And it's been years and years and years that I've seen it. They're always complaining about it. Even before social media, it was the liberal media, the liberal media, the liberal media. It's been this like the whole time. And so it's not surprising to me that social media is shaking out in much the same way.
I absolutely 100% would agree. That resonates with me immediately because one of the most common genres nowadays, if something gets banned, the net effect is to help somebody and help them within 30 minutes. It's often the case that, say, an anti-vaxxer gets a video taken down on YouTube, and then they go on Twitter and say, like, look, I'm being censored. Frame it as some sort of like 1984 Big Brother act. And then that goes viral. It goes very viral. And their audience rewards them for that every single time because it's exactly what they're looking for. This kind of almost like persecution fantasy, right? Where if that's kind of the perfect content for them. I'm not exactly sure how we can combat that because then the system is broken, right? And that,
it's just that none of these people, I'm just telling you from the jump, if these companies would have said, no, actually, you can't call for killing trans people on our website, even if you think you're being cute about it. No, you just can't do that. Oh, you don't like it? Wah. This is my data center. You know what I'm saying? Like, because that's there's no other thing that works that way, right? Like if you go into somebody's business, they're going to kick you out if you start wilding out. And social media seems to be the only one where the business owner isn't going to kick you out for wilding out, even if it makes them look bad or I don't know.
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hear very often, and that people are just completely thinking about abandoning the project. I mean, when Elon almost took over Twitter, people went to, was it like Counter Social or I don't know, some sort of platform that was alternative. But I don't think anybody has a solution, to be honest with you, because even people who have large followings are like, no, I'm going to dip. Like, I really am not here for the long term. I don't think this is going to be sustainable, to be on Twitter. So, I mean, I don't know what the solution is. I don't know if the platform can be redeemed. I really don't know. I mean, I'm sticking with it. I'm trying to fight misinformation on there, but ultimately, will it really help? I don't know. Yeah.
So the platform that's pretty clean is Pinterest. You can't search for vaccines on there. You're not going to find pro or anti-vaccine stuff. You just won't find anything.
Right.
They will kick you off for saying racist things, and they just don't care. But that's Pinterest. They're tiny.
Right. And they're, for hobbies and things like that too.
No,
It's looking for information.
It's a good business though. They're doing really well. I have a few friends who have worked at or do work at Pinterest, and they said the corporate culture there was pretty good, and that surprisingly enough, there were women and black people at their tech job, which was stunning to them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. It is. The whole social media situation is a mess. I mean, I don't have an optimistic thing to say about that.
Well, I think it's just a function of who runs it. Like, it doesn't take very long to figure out who's running these companies, and it's a lot of dudes that look like me. And we're not impacted by. I mean, I'm a gay guy myself, but I mean, like, I'd have to tell most people. So I'm, generally not going to be impacted by homophobia. And I live here in the Bay Area, so maybe people who live here think it doesn't even exist. But I'm not going to be impacted by racism. I have fairly good health care, so I guess I don't care about anti-vaxxers, but I kind of do. But maybe I could see where I wouldn't if it was in my financial interest not to. And I think that basically they're just a function of who runs them, and it's just a bunch of egomaniac Gen Xers who think they're going to fix the world through communication or whatever. I think like Mark Zuckerberg basically said they're going to save the world by connecting everyone at some point, or making the world a better place by connecting everyone. They could be thinking of that show Silicon Valley, where they make fun of that stuff.
I haven't seen it, but I absolutely agree with you. I graduated Stanford, literally 6 months ago, and so that kind of culture of technocracy. I mean, the thought that you can use technology, especially programming, which is a lot of where people who work at Facebook are working in, can really solve all problems in the world. I mean, totally with you on that. I don't know. I mean, I think one thing that might be useful, and it would be easy for them. I mean, obviously I can't make recommendations directly, but just to get actual experts involved who would be more than willing, pay them handsomely. I mean, the people who are putting out good information already could be contracted, and they would gladly, fact check things most of the day, right? I mean, that could be a job for somebody who's like a doctor or whatever. And instead they just take like CDC website and copy paste and put warnings on posts and don't regulate beyond there. I mean, there's a solution that doesn't involve, I would like to see big reform, but there's a solution that doesn't require it, and they still don't use that. That's what confuses me a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, you look at the boards of these companies, and it's like engineer, marketing person, engineer, marketing person.
Yeah.
Or, computer scientist, which is, not slightly different than engineer. But it's, it's all marketing people and engineers running these companies, and you don't have anybody from the humanities on your board, and then you wonder why you're doing bad things to humanity. It's like,
right.
those fields of study do exist for a reason, regardless of what the STEM lords think.
No, absolutely. Funny thing, I worked at a global health place, and I was in the comms meeting, and I mentioned I was an anthropology major, medical anthropology. And 5 other people were like, "Oh, I studied anthropology," or like, "Oh, I studied medical anthropology," and it was like the most. It's more than I'd even seen in my classes, in terms of people who are in the humanities. And it seems like a lot of them go to nonprofits, which is kind of the, maybe is what's causing a little bit of the split there. But yeah, I agree. Definitely need. Any humanities. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be really hardcore, but somebody.
Right, but instead they'll hire like somebody they're calling like a technology ethicist, and it's like, oh, that's just another engineer. That's an engineer who did peyote. Get out of here.
Right. Yeah.
Well, hey Noah, this has been a lot of fun. I feel like we could talk forever because we have a lot of common interests here, but try not to run things too long for our audience. Before we cut this off, can you tell people where to find you on the internet, and maybe real quick again what's up with Voices for Vaccines?
Yeah, so you can find me. I'm primarily on Twitter nowadays. I do a lot of writing there. My handle is at Michigan, as in the state _Noah. So that's my handle. I also have a website or a Substack where I'm starting to try and do more writing off of Twitter, although I don't use it very heavily. But if you want a link to that, that's in my bio on Twitter. For Voices for Vaccines, so their handle is just at Voices for Vaccines. They're on every social media. Really good source of information on anything vaccine related. I mean, if most people are not thinking about vaccines nowadays, but if you ever have a question, it's a really solid source. And I'm happy to answer anybody's questions. Just feel free to reach out either to me or the page.
Great, thanks.
Awesome.
Have you been shadow banned by the liberal media? Free market got you down? Do you get ratioed on every Twitter post because of your shit takes on literally everything? Then producer Dave and HK are probably watching your 3-hour dissertation on how a tomato cannot possibly be a fruit because gender and critical race theory can be cured with ivermectin. The Intellectual Dollar Tree, every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Pacific. Please leave it a 1-star review on iTunes. Check out the rest of our schedule at echoplexmedia.com.